If you're towing your vehicle behind your RV using a tow bar system, I have some really important information that I want to share with you, so please stick around. Hi friends, I'm Steve from RV Squared. I want to share with you some really important information that may save you from a lot of headaches down the road, or even worse. Now, many of you may have heard recently that there's been some towing incidents, and those have resulted in, at most, total loss of a tow vehicle. And I started digging in to find out if my vehicle was susceptible to the same problems. Now, without pointing fingers at certain manufacturers, I do need to disclose the manufacturers, because many of you will have the questions as to, well, you know, who's who in the zoo here, and do I need to watch out for it? I'm going to answer that categorically. Absolutely yes. Doesn't matter who or what you use for a tow bar system, you need to take these important steps. So I'm going to kind of fall on the sword and tell you that through my own neglect, I had some issues with my tow bar system, which happens to be a Roadmaster. However, the vehicles that have had catastrophic plate damage have been Blue Ox. The point of the matter is, these systems through towing are subject to a lot of shock and vibration and forces that some of this stuff is just an engineering trial and error. A lot of it is. And these companies will make modifications to their products as time goes on when they find out that certain failures happen because of undue stress. So that said, it's kind of up to us to kind of keep a routine inspection on our tow system. Now, just so you know, I go through a very good check after I connect, and I check all my components. I do 13 points of attachment, and I put my hands on each actual point of attachment and connection to make sure they're all secure. But in knowing that these plates that are mounted to the vehicle have become loose for whatever reason, I started crawling under my rig to get a little bit better sense of whether or not these plates were attached to my vehicle solid and secure. And to much of my disappointment, even though on the Raptor a lot of this is hidden because of the skid plate, but I was able to get underneath my base plates, and I was actually able to wiggle one of the bolts. So as I started to put a lot of pressure on this actual base plate, I could see it flexing a little bit. And that's not good, because what's happening is these base plates up here, particularly on the Jeep installation of the base plate for Blue Ox, this is attached different. It has a lot more lateral stress. With the Raptor, the way these bolts come up through the frame and then attach at a right angle with another through bolt, helped it to stay a little bit more secure. At least I'm convinced it has. Now, I will say, as I walk through this, Roadmaster has made some significant improvements. Now, this was put in 2019, so I want you to know they've come up with a revision this year, and I will point that out, what they've done to that attachment in the last 6 months this year. So there's been 2 revisions since 2019, and I would strongly suggest, as I did, I went ahead and did a complete replacement. I want to give a shout out to Gary and the guys down at Aero Trailer Supplies down in Ontario. They did a great job. They really helped me out, because some of this took 2 people with the truck up on a lift and some good power tools and grinders to get this old system removed. These bolts go up into the frame, but it's hard to reach into the frame to get a nut down the frame and onto this bolt. So what they did is they had this idea of putting a backing plate, a threaded backing plate, with basically a welding rod tacked onto that, and that enabled you to push this down the frame and place over the bolt. Now, the thing I don't like is that's a fairly thin backing plate that's threaded, and you know, even with Loctite on it, there's not more than 2 threads. 2 threads exposed isn't a lot for Loctite to even bite onto, and I'm convinced that that caused this backing plate to become loose. In the frame, if this base plate, is attached by these backing plates. I want you to see something, okay? That actually was free to spin around in the frame. So guess what? We all got under there and tried to tighten this down, and you can't because it just spins around in a circle, and that's not good. The other problem is on the Raptor, the skid plate comes up underneath and basically occludes this with another bracket, so you can't even get to that. So it's a real problem. So Roadmaster stepped up and they came up with a single plate that has good grade 5 nuts, just like these grade 5 bolts, on top of this, welded onto a plate, a unified plate. So that plate slides in and these two bolts go up through the plate, so there's no way that plate can spin. So now it's easy for you to get underneath and put a wrench to these. You can get an open end on the side when the skid plate's up and tighten this down as well. Because this was a single bolt into the frame, okay, they put a lot of stress on that frame. And so that frame became actually spiderweb cracked around that single hole. Roadmaster has since put in a solid spacer that spaces in between the box of the frame and allows you to put a long through bolt all the way through the frame, backed with a nice solid washer on each side, and gives you a point of attachment on both sides of that frame. So you've got two sides of the frame holding this bracket on the upper portion, and that's a big solid win, and I'm going to show you what that looks like when we crawl into the rig. In terms of the toe pins, there hasn't been a lot of changes. I actually think they've only done just a kind of little bit of rounding, if anything else, but I do notice that for the lock pin ears, they've done 2 rather than the single. So it just makes it, I think, a little bit nicer. Usually it just depends on how you connect your clevis pin, because sometimes it just works better when it's on the down position. We'll see if that makes it a little bit easier to connect and not worried about, you know, which side this is on. And it's just going to make it a little bit probably faster. I think it's just a better, more secure way. But all in all, the pin itself is dimensionally the same, just a little bit thinner and, like I said, rounded edges. So they've done some improvement on that. Now, before we go too much further, I want to point out a couple things that may be obvious to those who've towed for a long time, but I'm going to point out a couple things that you might think about that many of us may overlook, and I don't want this to all of a sudden be something where you just find out about this when it's too late. Part of the reason why you have these safety cables on a tow system is in the event of a catastrophic failure. And that failure sometimes we think of as, well, what would happen if for some reason this hitch assembly came undone and suddenly my tow bar is not attached to my vehicle anymore? Well, in principle, the safety cable that's attached to your coach is attached to the eyelet of the actual base plate. Well, here's the problem. If this base plate is the only thing that the safety cable is attached to, and suddenly the base plate goes away on you, now you've got the safety cable that's attached to the base plate. The base plate is going down the street with your tow vehicle. The only safety item left for you is your supplementary brake system. Now, this is not an argument, but I'm going to take the firm stance that I don't know how you could be comfortable towing a vehicle down the street relying upon these other mechanical things to hold your vehicle without a safety brake. I have a safety brake. Most of the people I know have safety brakes. So in case of a runaway, now here's the problem. You better make sure that the safety brake tether receiver is attached to a vehicle point other than the bracket, or sometimes they have crossbars. Now, I know that there's been people, the installers, they've mounted that on a portion of the vehicle that's at risk for being detached. Not necessarily the base plate, but maybe a cross member, or in some cases, there's been aftermarket bumpers like on Jeeps, and they mount that tether receiver on the bumper of the Jeep. And there has been instances where that bumper has gotten pulled off the Jeep. Well, now you've lost the bumper with the brackets, the safety cables, and the receiver for the tether. So you now have a runaway Jeep with no brake system and no safety tether. Now that being said, Gary down at Aero Trailer and I did about an hour-long discussion talking about different things that people can do and have done in the past. Blue Ox actually now packages a safety tether that is designed to go around a frame member and reattach itself to either your bumper or your base plate system. And that's not a bad way to go. I've seen these before a lot of times on Jeeps because they do aftermarket bumpers that are a little bit more subject to being ripped off in the terms of mechanical, not theft. But they've done different, slip knot methods of these safety tethers. We were talking about this quick link, whereas even on the Raptor, if you wanted to be able to go up around a frame member, perhaps attaching this quick link back down to your base plate just as a point of attachment, you could do that and it would look something like this. It would be probably a little bit bulky for my taste, but I'm trying to figure something out that would give me an extra layer of redundancy and safety so that it would look something perhaps like this, where instead of bolting onto your actual base plate eyelet, you'd be putting your safety hook onto this. So if you imagine you've got your base plate holding your toe pins, the normal force is on those toe pins, and if something were to happen to those toe pins or even your base plate system, everything is kind of tied in here as a safety member around the actual frame. So in a catastrophic failure where you lose everything, including your base plates, this will be your last point of attachment, and one of these would go on each side. Don't quite know how that's going to work with the Raptor. There's limited frame space down there that this could pass around, and we all know we can't just sit there and drill holes into our frame or attach eyelets. So let me crawl down and I'm going to show you how the new base plates are attached, and I'm going to try to point out some of the new features that Roadmaster has put on these base plates. So first off, here's the new base plate, new grade 5 bolts. This bolt backed with a giant washer is a long bolt, and it goes all the way over to the other side of the frame. These two bolts go up into the frame and secure with a nut right on the backing side of this box frame. Okay, so we're going to look down the actual frame and see the internal components. Okay, I've jammed a flashlight up in there, and you can see the spacer that goes from one side of the frame to the other, and down here you can see the nut that fastens to that bolt that goes all the way through the frame. You can also see in there part of the backing plate. Now I'm going to twist this light around just enough. Now you can see how they've had two nuts welded to a backing plate, and there's no way that's going to turn. So it makes it much, much easier to fasten this. Now, we did put Loctite on this. So we put red Loctite, 271. I definitely feel better about it going through the frame, securing both sides, because as I told you, there was only this one single bolt, and it went into a nut behind a single side of the frame. And so that frame was getting weakened and stress cracked up there. So it's something that I think is going to be much better now that that bolt goes all the way through, held by a nut on the other side, and it also has a spacer in between to give it more rigidity. As I said, this skid plate is going to come up under here. There's a Z-bracket, and it unfortunately comes right about to here. So it will occlude a little bit of this bolt over here. But you have to know that on the Roadmaster, for example, you've got 3 bolts. The Blue Ox has 4 bolts, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom, that you have to check routinely. All right, so I want to review what the scenario is here. We've replaced the Roadmaster base plates, but on the Raptor, the actual base plate doesn't have a secondary attachment point for a safety strap. So in addition to the actual safety cables that are on your coach, I recommend that you assess whether or not you're going to be able to put a safety strap that ties a secondary point of attachment from the frame of your vehicle to the base plates. And yeah, it might seem like overkill, but when those base plates fail, something happens and those base plates go off your vehicle, and that eyelet, the only eyelet that's holding your coach to the toad, or vice versa, goes with it, you're in trouble. So let's take a look at what I've come up with on the Raptor. This is not ideal. I want to caution you that when you wrap these cables around the frame member, make sure you're not crushing a brake line, a coolant line, or wiring, because over time that weight of that safety tether, if you will, is going to crush something else. Well, then you're kind of messing yourself up. So let's take a look at what I've done now that the skid plate is reattached to the front of the Raptor. So as you can see, the skid plate is on. They give you spacers to bring this skid plate spaced down a little bit, because the problem is that this Z bracket here, if that spacer's not there, then your actual skid plate will bang into the base plate. So what I've done here is I've just done a simple wrap of this safety tether up and over a frame member, obviously making sure that there's no way that this can actually slip off the frame. The only mechanical sound solution that you could come up with on this Roadmaster, since there's no secondary eyelet back here, which would be optimum, that way you could put this screw link in the back and get this all out of the way. So it's a little bit cumbersome for my liking, because what you'd end up having to do is, since this quick link is in here and it's actually occupying that eyelet, your only option now would be to put your standard safety cables in through that. And it's just a little bit bulky for my taste, but I just wanted to share that with you because that is actually the most safe solution. It's a little bit extra hardware, a little bit too bulky for my taste, but I wanted to show this to you that you can think about a solution for yourself. So food for thought. So I have 500 plus, I think, was the new bracket system. That's the base plates, the tow hooks. It took a little bit more labor to get this stuff off, so I'm into it a little bit over $1,200. And if you amortize that out, I've been running this for about 3 years and about 60,000 miles worth of towing. So it was time, and I just wanted to share this information with you. And of course, I want you to check your system. Definitely look into maybe upgrading and give some thought about, in a catastrophic failure, are you adequately backed up? And I hope this helps you, and also make sure that you share this with other people as well. Certainly give them this link to this video, and hopefully that this will be a little bit more widespread amongst our community, because quite frankly, a lot of my friends, even though they're very mechanical, really haven't given this much thought. Now, that said, Roadmaster will say right on the pin, make sure you inspect these every 3,000 miles. They now put a warning label right on here. It says, every 3,000 miles, owner must inspect bracket for fatigue and tightness of bolts. Well, yeah, well, it's not the first time we haven't read instructions or warning labels. I think it's just complacency. Hey, I know for one, I hadn't thought about checking those bolts for thousands of miles. So we kind of learn from other people's experiences, and hopefully we avoid any big problems in the future. So thank you once again for watching. I hope this helps you, and make sure to subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and leave comments below. I really appreciate all of them, and I want you to have safe travels. Bye-bye.